Hey, what's going on, guys? Rago here from Kite. So I'm just getting into work again, and I caught up with Aaron here. And if you
What's up,
haven't,
guys?
if you haven't had the chance to talk with Aaron on the phone yet, he's probably one of the most stoked people alive.
Good morning from Ferrisburg, Michigan. It's Kook Fest out here. We're all kooks. It's us from the shop. I'm not bagging on anybody.
And actually, a couple of years back, Aaron trained me to be an instructor here.
That was a long time ago, dude. Those were good days of riding at Pure Marquette, having pizzas after the session, sitting around with some beers, and educating the young Groms, man. It was good stuff.
No doubt, we had a lot of good times. Anyway, point being, Aaron here probably switches kites faster than most people change. Anyway, point being, Aaron, he's kind of our resident North. Why'd I say North? You like put the word in my mouth. Alright, let's do this. Anyway, so Aaron, he's kind of our resident gear tweaker, so you never really know what kite you're going to catch him on year to year. And we were in the shop this weekend, and we were chatting about old gear, and it got me thinking about a common question is, what kite is right for me? So on our webpage, you can actually go through the kites and browse by riding style. And I was going through there and I noticed that a lot of the kites, they cross over from category to category, and this can actually get a bit confusing. So this week I wanted to break that down and kind of explain this to you guys. So we're gonna do freeride kites versus freestyle kites. So let's get to it. So what's interesting about kiteboarding gear is in the early days, we saw a lot of changes. So year to year, kites would be monumentally different. And in the last few years, this really isn't the case anymore. And what's happened is a lot of the brands have settled on their lineup, and they're just really refining the gear in that lineup. And what this has done is it's caused most kites to actually become all-around kites. And this can lead to some confusion and as well some frustrating gear reviews. Because what happens is you're trying to figure out something about a kite, and even us, we've been guilty of this. When you're talking about, oh, this kite, it does everything really well, which leaves you wondering, well, what does the kite not do well? I mean, all kites do it all, right? They all jump well, they all ride upwind well. And while this is the case, actually there are specific categories that cater to certain needs. So while most kites are all-around kites, they do cater to certain attributes. And so what we're going to do in this video is we're going to break down the different categories and the different attributes that are common to all of these kites. And it's important to remember that every kite is different, and in this series we'll be breaking down the differences in all the kites. But with these all-around kites, there are certain kites that fall into a category that you can expect common attributes. And we're going to be addressing those attributes today. And hey, just a heads up, most of you don't know this, but for every video I do, there's actually a more complete written blog. So if you click the little eye icon in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you can actually finish this video on the blog and then read more and just see what I missed or what I may have added after the video. Let's start with the freeride category. So with freeride kites, what you're going to get are incredibly user-friendly, really easy to use kites. And these kites tend to have the largest wind range, they jump the easiest, they get upwind the easiest, they handle the gusts the best. And kites like this might be like the Rebel or the Cabrini Switchblade. And more or less with a kite like this, you can have less kites to get out of more wind. It just makes progression easier. And these kites are really fun. What's great about them is you can make the most out of subpar conditions. So like I said, they handle the gust really well, and they just have somewhat of an autopilot feel, so they just make your life really easy. Now that said, most kites are not just freeride kites. They're actually all-around kites with freeride kite characteristics. So moving on to the next category, we have the all-around category, and this is actually where most kites fall into, is that all-around freeride category. And here's where the lines get a little bit blurry, because most kites do fall into this all-around category, and that's why you always hear, oh, this kite jumps great, this kite rides upwind great. It can get a little bit frustrating, and the truth is that most kites actually are designed to do it all well. So with this category, just to give you some perspective, kites that I would classify as the all-around, freeride big air category might be like the North Evo, the Cabrini Switchblade, the Nash Pivot, the Slingshot Rally, and in fact, actually light wind kites like the Contra, the Turbine, or the Juice would fall in this category. So what are the common attributes that you can expect from the all-around freeride performance category? Well, like I said, these kites are all different in their own regard, and they do share attributes like the large wind range. They all jump effortlessly. They do ride upwind really well and effortlessly. Probably the most common attribute you can expect from kites like this is they have a lot of hang time. So that means you're going to be in the air longer with kites like this. And they do bridge into other categories like surf, wakestyle, freestyle, or even kite loops. But remember that each of these kites is actually going to favor certain niche attributes that are paired with these free ride characteristics. So they won't all kite loop equally well, they won't all surf equally well, they won't all work equally well for wakestyle or freestyle. And honestly, for the average rider, these kites are good enough. So sometimes people get a little bit tweaked about gear and they have to be on the best of the best. And the reality is, with these all-around freeride kites, for the level that most kiteboarders are going to push it to, unless you're competing, these are going to be good enough in all the other niche categories. And the reason I say this is the benefits of those freeride characteristics, making the kites more of an autopilot feel, it's going to make your life a lot easier. In fact, while teaching, I'm often teaching on kites like this, and one of the first things I do with my students is I'll have them fly the kite with just their fingertips. And the reason I have them do this is because I want them to understand to let the kite do the work for you. A common mistake that newer kiteboarders make all the time is they want to oversteer the kite, they want to overfly it, and they don't quite have the skills to really control the kite yet. And with all-around freeride kites, these kites do all of the work for you, more or less. Now, with all that said, there are always trade-offs, and the trade-offs of this particular category is there's more of a delayed feel, which can kind of lead to a disconnected feeling to your kite, which is good for a newer rider, but maybe not so good for that rider who has 3 years of experience under their belt. And again, even if you're a rider who has been riding for 3 years, it's not that you're going to dislike this attribute, it's more so an acquired taste. So if you're out there and you watch somebody and they're being very aggressive with their kite, maybe they're doing a lot of kite loops, or they're doing a specific niche, whether they're getting into the waves and really pushing to that next level, that's where you're going to start to notice some of the trade-offs with these kites. And when you get getting more granular when you look at each of these kites, they do often favor other attributes. So for example, some kites might perform better in the waves, while others might be a little more akin to like that freestyle or that kite looping feel. And I guess the best way to describe the trade-offs of all of these kites is, if you look at each kite's lineup, they usually have their all-around kite, and then they have some niche kites. So let's take the waves, for example. Cabrina has the Drifter, North has the Neo, Slingshot has the Wave, Nash has the Slash. And hands down, when you compare these all-around kites to their niche wave kites, well, yeah, the wave kites are going to way outperform these kites in that specific condition. So it's just important to remember there's always trade-offs, and when you're doing something that's made to do everything well, you're going to make some sacrifices, but these sacrifices are really near that high level of riding that I would say 90% of people will never even notice. And it's important to note that not all-around kites are created equal. So a couple of kites that I would still put in that user-friendly, classified all-around category would be like the Liquid Force Envy or the Slingshot RPM. But these kites are just catered a little bit more to the unhooked rider. So they still have all of these easy-to-use attributes, but they do make a few trade-offs for some of that performance. So do these kites ride upwind as well or jump as easy as kites like the Switchblade or the Evo? No, they actually don't. They don't quite jump as easy as a lot of other kites. And the reason is that these kites are just a little more performance oriented, but truth be told, these kites are still categorized as user-friendly kites, because they are very forgiving and they are made for progression, and they are kites that you can take it to the highest level of riding. And no, you can actually take any of these kites to the highest level of riding. It's just that the higher level kites will have certain attributes that are going to make it easier for somebody of a different ability level. And I'm not going to go into too much detail of all of these kites together, but I am going to make a point over the next year or so to compare every kite that we carry back to back and just get really granular and break down all the little differences and trade-offs between each kite. So stay tuned and we'll eventually get through all of these. So taking a step forward into the performance category, we have crossover kites. Now these kites are still all-around kites, but these kites cater to more intermediate to advanced riders, and what that means is they often have a more direct feel. They're much more reactive, meaning when you turn that bar, they're going to respond a lot quicker. They're often built for kite loops, These tend to be characterized by bigger, more aggressive jumps, but less hang time. So when you pull that trigger on these kites, they take more timing, they rip you off the water, just a much more direct, more aggressive, but fun feel. So they're just catered to a different rider. So what you have is still an all-around kite. These kites, again, you know, they're going to have these shared characteristics, and some will be catered more towards the waves, like say the North Dice. Others might have a penchant for freestyle, like the Cabrina FX, but they do still fall under this crossover category. And you know, as well, you could find like the Nash Dash in this category of kites. And what you get out of the crossover kites is they're made to perform. These are performance kites, and they make some trade-offs on the ease of use for performance. And some of the trade-offs you can expect from crossover kites would be like a reduced wind range, they don't have as much hang time, they're just not quite as forgiving. Granted, in the last 3 years, these crossover kites have gotten incredibly forgiving. You know, so could a newer rider get out there on a kite like the FX or the Dice or the Dash? Absolutely, you could. You're just going to forego some of the benefits that you might experience from a you know, more freeride oriented kite, where it's just going to, you know, jump a little easier, it's going to get upwind a little bit easier. And these are just some of the trade-offs that you're going to make. And actually, while watching reviews back in the day when these kites first came out, this is one of the things that frustrated me was, well, hold on, I just watched a review on this freeride kite and it does everything well, but now this crossover kite also does everything well? And that's where some of the confusion comes in, because you know, these reviewers, you know, they're actually correct. These kites are designed to do everything well, but they're designed to do certain things better than other. So you just have to look at the trade-offs and the common characteristics that you'd expect out of different kites like this to really size them up. So just to reiterate, you know, the biggest difference that you're going to notice from all-around freeride kites to all-around crossover kites is, you know, the crossover kites, they're going to lose some wind range, they're going to be more aggressive, they're going to be more fun to fly, a little bit less hang time, but then they do cater to the niches better. So they're going to be better in the waves, they're going to be better at wakestyle, you know, whatever particular performance category they might be aimed at, they're just going to outperform the freeride kite in that category. But on the flip side, the freeride kite is going to make your life easier. So for that average rider who just wants to get out there and jump as high as possible, you're probably going to want to stick with a freeride kite because that's going to make your life easier. Whereas if you've been riding for a few years, or you just want to go after a particular niche, whether it's the waves or freestyle or kite loops, then you would want to look to a crossover kite. And that's the biggest difference between these two categories. Now finally, moving into the final category, we have freeride kites like sea kites. And I would actually consider this a niche category. So this is not an all-around category. Can you take a sea kite in the waves? Yeah, you can. Can you do freeride with a sea kite? Of course you can do freeride with a sea kite. And the reason I call these niche kites is because they're designed to do one thing and one thing very well. So when you look at the trade-offs that you would see in the all-around categories, what happens is these kites, you can multiply the good and the bad aimed at one specific category, whether it's a freestyle kite or a surf kite or a big air kite, like say the Apollo, for example. That's a great big air kite. You're going to get a ton of hang time out of that kite, but it makes some pretty big trade-offs. It's so high aspect ratio, for example, that it can actually be pretty difficult to relaunch. And while it's a very effective light wind kite, I would not consider that a light wind kite. And Cabrina wouldn't consider a light wind kite either. But it often does create a point of confusion because it looks like it might be a very effective light wind kite. And you know, there are other categories as well, like race. And you know, often what's happening with these niche categories is brands will do some experimenting. So you'll see a kite show up for a couple of years. You know, some are amazing, some are forgettable. Usually the ones that are amazing end up finding a place in each brand's respective lineup, and that's where you start seeing years and years of refinement come into place. So I'm kind of actually curious to see what the next 5 years will bring us, because right now we're seeing a lot of different categories emerge, we're seeing a lot of new designs come out, nothing groundbreaking, but again, you know, over the years these kites are going to just get better and better. So in summary, all kites do fall across a spectrum, from user-friendly to more advanced. Some do fall in the niche category. It can get a bit confusing. So feel free to reach out to us if you're looking at a specific kite. Just give us a call and we'll walk you through it. We'll explain to you the benefits and what some of the trade-offs of this kite are. And hey guys, if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. I know it can be a bit of a rabbit hole when looking at kites, And I made a point to stay kind of broad on this one. I could have got a lot more detailed and gone into like aspect ratios or deltas or hybrids or all these other things. But I just wanted to avoid some confusion and just give you some general categories in which these kites do fall in and their common attributes. So if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. And at the end of this video, I'm going to leave a link too as well, the Get Stoked button. So if you want to read more and read my blog and see what I had to say about this gear, give that a click. And until next Wednesday, this has been Rygo, and I will see you next week.